Imagine moving into your dream home, a charming house nestled in a peaceful, historic neighborhood. It's everything you've ever wanted, until the HOA president knocks on your door, claiming your house has historical significance and must be turned into a tourist museum. Sounds absurd, right? But that's exactly what happened when I bought my dream home. What started with the HOA's innocent request soon turned into a full-blown scheme to exploit my property for profit. They didn't just want to regulate my lawn. They wanted control over my entire home. I refused to let them have their way, and that's when things got really messy. Like the video, subscribe, and comment below if you've ever had a run-in with an overzealous HOA or someone trying to take control of your property. Your support helps us keep these unbelievable stories going, and you won't want to miss what happens next. When I found the old house on the edge of the quaint town, I knew it was meant to be mine. It was perfectly imperfect, a little worn around the edges, but the kind of home that had a history. A home with character. The house sat in a quiet street, surrounded by tall oak trees that shaded the property, giving it a peaceful, almost magical feel. I couldn't wait to start my new life there. I had recently retired from my corporate job and was eager for the next chapter. I wanted a place I could relax, host dinner parties, and spend afternoons working in my garden. It wasn't too big, just right. The house was charming, with original wood floors, high ceilings, and beautiful windows that let the sunlight pour in during the morning hours. It had everything I needed, and it felt like it had been waiting for me. My neighbors were friendly enough, but there was one thing that stood out from the moment I arrived: the HOA. I'd heard stories about them, of course, the neighborhood watch that ruled with an iron fist, constantly monitoring everyone's lawn and the color of their front doors. But I didn't think much of it. I had my house, and they had their rules. Little did I know, the HOA was about to turn my dream home into their next museum project. One afternoon, just a few weeks after moving in, I got a visit from Cheryl, the HOA president. She was an older woman with a stern look and a clipboard, exactly what I imagined when I thought of a neighborhood rule enforcer. She introduced herself with a stiff handshake and immediately launched into a long spiel about the importance of maintaining the historic value of the neighborhood. I nodded politely, thinking it was just some welcome spiel. But then she said something that caught my attention. "Well, your house is actually quite special," Cheryl continued, her eyes twinkling slightly. "It has quite a historic significance, you know. We've been discussing ways to preserve it and share its history with the community." I raised an eyebrow. Historic significance? It's just a house. I've never heard anything about it being a historic site. "Oh, it's not officially on any registry, but it's very old, built in the late 1800s. As you can see from the architectural style," she explained, tapping the clipboard. "We're thinking of turning it into a museum for the neighborhood." I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. "A museum?" "Yes. We'd love to host guided tours for visitors, and even set up a small gift shop right here in your foyer. It could be a wonderful resource for the community and even boost tourism to the area." "Wait a minute," I said, trying to process what she was saying. "You want to turn my house into a tourist attraction?" Cheryl's smile didn't waver. "Exactly. It's a great way to preserve the neighborhood's history and generate a little income for the two. We'd also make sure that all the tours follow the guidelines, of course. We'd even handle the scheduling and staffing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had just moved into the house to enjoy some peace and quiet, and now Cheryl wanted to turn it into a public spectacle. My home was not some historical landmark for tourists to gawk at. I had no intention of becoming a part of some HOA-run museum project. "Thank you, but that's not something I'm interested in," I said firmly, feeling my irritation rise. "This is my home, not a tourist attraction." Cheryl seemed momentarily taken aback but quickly recovered, her smile more forced now. "Oh, of course. But it's just something for the community to consider. You know, if you change your mind, we'd be happy to discuss it further." As Cheryl walked away, clipboard in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why was the HOA so focused on my house? And why did they think they could just decide to turn my property into a public attraction? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about preserving history. This was about control. And as I would soon find out, Cheryl and the HOA had a much bigger agenda than I could ever imagine. After Cheryl left, I was left standing in the middle of my living room, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. A museum? I had bought this house for peace, for quiet mornings and cozy evenings, not to have strangers parading through my living room. gawking at the furniture like some kind of exhibit. But as absurd as it seemed, something about the way Cheryl had presented it felt calculated, like she was expecting me to say yes. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I didn't trust the HO, especially not after Cheryl's visit. It wasn't just the museum idea, it was the way she seemed so sure of herself, like she had already made up her mind for me. She'd made it clear that the HOA was involved in more than just managing neighborhood standards. They were involved in a hidden agenda, and I needed to figure out what that was. Over the next few days, I started keeping an eye on the HOA's activities. I paid attention to how often their vehicles drove past my house and made sure to look out for any unusual behavior. What I found didn't exactly make me feel any better. Every couple of days, Cheryl's team would drive by my house, taking pictures, jotting down notes, and sometimes even standing in front of my home, looking at it like they were planning something. It was like they were measuring it, assessing its potential. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just interested in the house's historical value. They were planning something much bigger. The neighborhood had always been quiet and peaceful, but the HOA's growing interest in my home was raising red flags. One afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just keep waiting around to see what the HOA was planning. I needed to find out more, and I needed to do it quickly. I reached out to an old friend who worked in real estate. He was familiar with zoning laws and had connections with developers, so I figured he might be able to help me understand what Cheryl's HOA was up to. When I told him about the HOA's sudden interest in my house, he immediately sounded concerned. "You need to look into who owns the properties around you," he advised. "If they're trying to turn your house into a museum, there might be more going on than just that. There could be bigger plans in the works, and if I were you, I'd want to know who stands to profit from it." His advice stuck with me. I had to start digging deeper. The next few days were filled with late-night searches on zoning laws and property records. It wasn't long before I discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. The HOA had quietly started buying up houses in the area, properties with historical significance, and many of them were close to mine. I soon uncovered that Cheryl and the HOA weren't just trying to preserve the history of the neighborhood. They had entered into secret deals with developers who planned to buy out the entire area, demolish some houses, and turn the space into a tourist district, complete with gift shops, restaurants, and yes, museums. The HOA's so-called museum plan was just the beginning. I felt betrayed. The house I thought I'd found for peace and solitude was now at the heart of a battle for control. It wasn't just about preserving history. It was about lining the pockets of developers and transforming a quiet neighborhood into a money-making tourist trap. In my home, it was the first domino in their plan. Now I had a choice: sit back and let them take over, or fight back and expose what the HOA was really doing. And I knew there was no way I was going to let them turn my life into their profit machine. The more I dug into the HOA's dealings, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a quirky neighborhood association. They were part of a well-organized operation to reshape the entire area for profit. But what really stunned me was how smoothly they had been going about it. Cheryl had used my house as a test case. She thought I was just some naive homeowner who would fall in line, but she didn't know who she was messing with. I had spent my entire career working in corporate strategy, navigating complex deals and negotiations. If they thought they could take me for a ride, they were about to be in for a very rude awakening. The first step was gathering more evidence. I wasn't going to let them push me out without a fight. I spent the next week reaching out to other homeowners in the neighborhood, especially those who had already sold their homes to the developers or were targeted by the HOA for minor violations. I wanted to expose this conspiracy, and to do that, I needed to know how deep it went. What I learned was more than I expected. Many of my neighbors had been approached by Cheryl's team and encouraged to sell their homes at prices well below market value, all under the guise of neighborhood improvements. It wasn't just about my house, it was about an entire district-wide transformation. I spoke to one elderly couple down the street who had been offered a tempting payout for their house. They didn't want to leave, but they couldn't refuse the offer. They were being cornered, with the HOA turning the screws and making them feel like they had no other option. I also spoke with a few more people who had been harassed with violations. From absurd landscaping rules to fines for unsightly fences, the HOA's main tactic was to force people into submission. But I wasn't going to let that happen to me, or anyone else in the neighborhood. It was time to put my plan into action. I knew I couldn't take on the HOA and developers alone, but I had a strategy. The HOA had been using its influence and power to manipulate the neighborhood, and it was about time the truth came out. I decided to reach out to a local journalist I had worked with in the past, someone who specialized in investigative reporting. She was my ally, and she had the connections and resources to make this story public. Together, we started compiling everything: documents, emails, and witness testimonies. We were building a case against the HOA and the developers, one that would expose their dirty dealings and their attempts to gentrify the entire neighborhood for personal gain. I also planned a neighborhood meeting, an open session where I could confront Cheryl and the HOA publicly, armed with all the information we had uncovered. This was no longer just about defending my house. This was about standing up for the entire community that had been manipulated and coerced into silence. But I couldn't just go in guns blazing. I had to be careful. The HOA had deep connections, and I knew Cheryl wouldn't take kindly to being called out. I needed to play this carefully and wait for the right moment. I made sure to schedule the meeting at a time when Cheryl would feel confident, thinking she had everything under control. Little did she know I had already tipped off the media, and I knew that when I exposed her, the neighborhood support would be more than enough to take down her plan. The media attention would make sure that this story reached far beyond the neighborhood. As the meeting approached, I could feel the pressure mounting. But I was ready. I wasn't going to let them take over my home, my neighborhood, or my future. It was time for Cheryl and the HOA to answer for what they had done. The day of the meeting finally arrived. I had done everything I could to prepare for this confrontation, and I was determined to make it count. The community center was packed, with dozens of neighbors filling every available seat. The atmosphere was electric. People were buzzing with anticipation, but there was an undercurrent of nervousness. I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. Cheryl stood at the front of the room, her usual confident smile plastered on her face as she prepared to open the meeting. I could tell she thought this was just another routine gathering, another opportunity to assert her control over the neighborhood. But this time, things would be different. I walked in, holding my head high, and made my way to the front. As I passed Cheryl, I could see her eyes narrow in recognition, but I didn't flinch. I was ready. The meeting started just as Cheryl had planned, with her talking about the usual neighborhood updates, the petty landscaping rules, and the minor changes she wanted to make. It seemed like business as usual, but as soon as she finished her introduction, I stood up. "Cheryl, I think it's time we talked about something a little more important," I said, my voice calm but firm. Cheryl blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me?" she asked, trying to recover. "I think it's time the entire neighborhood knows what you've really been up to," I said. "You've been running around making deals behind the scenes with developers, trying to turn our homes into tourist attractions. You've been harassing people, offering them lowball prices for their properties, and you've been working hand in hand with developers to gentrify this area." The room fell dead silent. Cheryl's face flushed a deep shade of red, but she quickly tried to regain control. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "This is nonsense. This meeting is about the community's interests, not whatever you're making up." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder filled with documents, property records, email exchanges, photos of houses that had been sold under suspicious circumstances, and even a few pages showing the deal between the developers and the HOA. I slammed the folder onto the table, and everyone in the room leaned forward, eager to see what I had. I began laying out the evidence piece by piece, explaining how Cheryl had manipulated homeowners, pressured them into selling their homes for far less than they were worth, and used her power as HOA president to push through illegal zoning changes. I could see the shock on the faces of my neighbors. Some were whispering, some were shaking their heads in disbelief. This was the truth they had been kept in the dark about for so long. As I revealed more about the developers' plans to turn the neighborhood into a commercial district, people started to get angry. They weren't just angry at Cheryl, they were angry at themselves for not seeing what was happening. But I could see a fire ignite in them. It wasn't just about my fight anymore. It was about all of us. Cheryl stood there speechless for a moment. Her mask of composure had completely fallen, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She was losing control, and she knew it. Before she could say another word, the door to the community center swung open, and a group of local journalists walked in. They had been tipped off, and they had cameras rolling. I could see Cheryl's face twist with frustration as the reporters made their way to the front of the room. "Cheryl," one of the reporters asked, "can you comment on the allegations that you've been involved in a property manipulation scheme with developers?" At that moment, I knew it was over for her. The media would carry the story, The neighborhood would stand behind the truth, and Cheryl's corruption would be exposed for everyone to see. The developers wouldn't dare follow through with their plans now that everything was public. Cheryl tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She was surrounded by the reporters, and there was no escape. The room erupted in applause as the truth finally came to light. People stood up cheering, not just for the victory over Cheryl, but for the community that had come together to take down an unjust system. The meeting ended with Cheryl's immediate resignation as HOA president. But the real work had only just begun. We were going to stop the developers from taking over our homes, and we were going to ensure that the neighborhood stayed in the hands of those who loved it, not those who saw it as a way to profit. The dust settled quickly after the HOA meeting. Cheryl was gone, her grip on the neighborhood shattered. But it wasn't just her resignation that marked the end of this battle. It was the beginning of something much bigger for the community. We had won, and we weren't about to let it slip away. After the meeting, a small group of us gathered in the local coffee shop to discuss our next steps. The neighborhood felt like a different place now, as if a weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. The residents who had been too scared to speak out finally felt the freedom to express their frustrations. One of the first things we did was contact a local lawyer who specialized in property rights and real estate law. We had the evidence we needed: Cheryl's corruption, the developers' plans, and the shady deals that had been going on behind our backs. We filed an official class action lawsuit against the HOA for fraud, harassment, and abuse of power. At the same time, the media coverage of Cheryl's scandal went viral. Local news outlets picked up the story, but soon it was being covered by national networks as well. The idea of a neighborhood being exploited for profit struck a chord with people all over the country. Cheryl's actions were no longer a local issue. They were a nationwide warning about the dangers of unchecked power in community organizations. The developers, who had initially planned to buy out our neighborhood, quickly realized that they could no longer go forward with their plans. The backlash was overwhelming. Investors pulled out, and the zoning changes that had been quietly pushed through by the HOA were reversed. Our community was safe. But the victory didn't stop there. With Cheryl and the developers out of the picture, we knew we had to rebuild. It wasn't just about protecting our homes, it was about empowering the community to stand together against any future threats. We organized town hall meetings, set up a new, transparent HOA, and started actively involving residents in decision-making processes. We didn't just want to restore what we had, we wanted to make it better. Over time, the neighborhood returned to its quiet, peaceful charm, but now there was a sense of unity and trust among the residents. We had fought for our homes, our rights, and our future, and we had won. As for Cheryl, well, her attempt at exploiting the neighborhood came to an end the moment the truth was exposed. She disappeared from the public eye, and I doubt anyone in town would ever look at her the same way again. Her reign of terror was over. The community had taken back control. In the end, this wasn't just about saving my house from becoming a tourist attraction. It was about standing up to corruption and ensuring that no one could take away our sense of home. We had proven that when a community comes together, anything is possible. With that, the neighborhood had returned to normal. But the lessons we learned from this experience would stick with us forever. Never let anyone, no matter their title or position, take control of your life. Stand up, speak out, and protect what's yours. And that's how we took back control of our neighborhood, exposing Cheryl's corrupt scheme and standing up to the developers who wanted to profit off our homes. The HOA's hidden agenda was exposed for the world to see, and in the end, it was our community that won. If you've ever had an HOA try to control your life or faced an overbearing neighborhood association, subscribe and comment below. Share your story with us. We love hearing about how you've fought back against the system. Your support keeps these stories coming, and we can't wait to share more jaw-dropping tales with you. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone take away what's yours. Stand up, speak out, and protect your home.